let me ask you this. If you had to stop working today, no more paychecks, no more 9 to 5, just you and whatever you've got saved up, how long would you last before you start having instant ramen as your retirement survival plan? And if that question made you a little nervous, trust me, you're not alone. And most people have no clue how much they actually need to retire or retire early. And you know what? That's a problem, because if you don't know your number, how do you know when you've won the game? And what does a 15% savings rate give you? Or how long does it take to achieve your FIRE number by maxing out your retirement accounts every single year, right? So I would love to show you this. So before we dive into the nitty gritty, let's talk about those known FIRE numbers floating around. Now, you've probably seen some of them, right? Like poverty FIRE, lean FIRE, or fat FIRE, and all that stuff. And it's like choosing a fitness level from basic to advanced. And depending on your physical condition, you just need to know your endurance and goals. So for starters, I love this one. And you've got poverty FIRE, which is like living on $15,000 a year, meaning you need about $375,000 invested using the 4% withdrawal rate. And this is obviously not a typical FIRE number, because I want you to achieve a higher number even than that. But it's going to tell you that once you have over $375,000 invested, you're going to be able to retire above the poverty line. And there's lean FIRE that's around $36,000 a year. And that means you got to have around $900,000 invested using the 4% withdrawal rate, and you're still living very frugally, but at least you can afford the occasional takeout without guilt. And just think of it as living on about the 25th percentile of the income. And I have a lot of respect for the lean FIRE community, because those guys are truly, truly frugal, okay? Then you got the, let's call it just the traditional FIRE at $75,000 a year, which requires about $1.875 million invested. And this is where you start to feel a bit more comfortable. Nothing too extravagant, but you're not pinching pennies either. And the next one is called a chubby FIRE. Now, with chubby FIRE, it's $155,000 a year, which means you need to have about $3.875 million invested, assuming that you're doing the 4% withdrawal rate. And with this amount, you've got breathing room here, and you get to have some travel, a nice car, and dinners that don't involve looking at the right side of the menu, right? And as for fat FIRE, this is $215,000 a year at a minimum, and which is $5.375 million invested. And at this point, you're basically living like a retired CEO with private club memberships, luxury vacations, and never worrying about the price of gas again. And there's a fat FIRE community on Reddit that I actually follow, and you can check out their stories on the sub too. But let me remind you that these are just averages from the 2024 Census Bureau, because you have your own story to tell. Personal finance is personal for a reason. And do you always need to have $2 million or $3 million to retire early? Not necessarily, because it always depends on your annual expenses and the number of passive income streams and you'll have besides your investments. However, when it comes to calculating your FIRE number, you have to focus on your expenses, not your income, but your annual expenses. And I know you're thinking about how to replace your income, but instead, it's actually the expenses you have now that matters to your financial independence number, right? So let me show you this. So first, you need to calculate your annual expenses, and you can do this by breaking them down into non-discretionary and discretionary expenses. So what are non-discretionary expenses? Well, they're the basic stuff you have to pay for. You have to prioritize them by groceries, housing, utilities, transportation, basic insurance, communication, clothes, your vehicle, and those essential annual subscriptions. Now, multiplying that annual number by 25 and you'll get a baseline number. So if you spend $10,000 a year on groceries, and if you multiply that by 25, you're going to need at least $250,000 invested to be financially independent with only your groceries using the 4% withdrawal rate, which means that you can technically have your groceries paid by your investments and not by your 9-to-5 job. That makes sense so far, right? Then there's discretionary. This is where the fun stuff and the spending happens. And these are non-essential subscriptions like Netflix, HBO Max, and all that. Eating out at a restaurant, going to I don't know, Thai restaurant or Olive Garden or something like that. And entertainment, going to the concerts or going to a sporting event, annual credit card fees, travel, pets, gifts, that second property that you're dreaming of, and anything else that you do not need. Again, you can add them all up together, then multiply by 25. And so you could have $40,000 a year in discretionary expenses because that's how much you want to spend on entertainment, travel, and concert tickets every year. So you would need an additional $1 million to pay for those discretionary expenses on top of the non-discretionary expenses. Again, that makes sense so far, right? And one more thing you need to calculate is your emergency fund for your retirement, not the typical 3 to 6 months in expenses, but you're going to need 12 months of expenses, 18 months of expenses, or 24 months of expenses in an emergency fund to only use when the stock market is in a downturn, like you're seeing right now in 2025 at the time I'm recording this video. And if you're looking to retire early, you should aim for at least 2 years worth of your total annual expenses in an emergency fund. But it's going to depend on the number of income streams that you're going to have. Are you only relying on a single brokerage account to pay for your expenses? Or are you going to have multiple income streams? In any case, you don't want to be cash poor and have all of your money tied up in investments. What if the S&P 500 drops by 40% in a single year due to another global recession? Can you diversify your income streams to hedge against the stock market? And these are the things that you have to think about, especially when you get closer to your retirement age. And step 2 is to choose a safe withdrawal rate. And you don't want to start taking money out without understanding the withdrawal rate. And this is the percentage of your investments you can take out each year without running out of money with historical returns. And you've probably heard of the 4% rule, but there's also a 3% and even a 5% option. And of course, the lower you go, the safer you're going to be. And that's just math. But the thing is, you're going to need a much bigger nest egg if you were to drop your withdrawal rate. So let me go through them one by one. Basically, 3% is super conservative, but it also means your money will probably outlive you depending on your portfolio allocation. So if you're looking to do a 3% withdrawal rate, you'll need to multiply your annual expenses by 33. So if your annual expenses are $50,000 a year, then multiplying that by 33 will give you $1.65 million. And 4% is the classic rule. And that's pretty much how I have my FIRE number figured out, but you can do whatever you want. And I want you to check out the free resources like the Trinity study about the safe withdrawal rate at firestation.com/resources. So if you're looking to do a 4% withdrawal rate, you'll need to multiply your annual expenses by 25. Now, with 5% withdrawal rate, it is more aggressive, but if you look at the Trinity study, it's going to depend on how you allocate your investment portfolio. Is it going to be 100% stocks throughout your retirement, or is it going to be 75% stocks and 25% bonds? That study will show you the historical returns and the success rate. And nobody can really predict how the stock market will perform in the future, right? So if you're looking to do a 5% withdrawal rate, you'll need to multiply your annual expenses by 20. So if your annual expenses are $50,000 a year, then you'll need at least $1 million for the 5% withdrawal rate. And again, the safe withdrawal rate will depend on how your portfolio is diversified between stocks and bonds. And if your average annual return is like, let's say 6% a year, and you want to take out 4%, then there's a potential growth of 2% for the difference, right? But what if you have a bad stock market year, like in 2022, 2018, or 2009, or maybe even this year in 2025, then you might need to lower your withdrawal rate from 4% to 3%, or maybe even lower down to 2%. And that's when your emergency fund and other income sources should come into play. Maybe you don't want to touch your investments at all if we go through a global recession with the market down by 20% or more. But it really boils down to your personal risk tolerance. And just keep in mind that the higher the withdrawal rate, the faster you might deplete your nest egg, and that depends on your FIRE number. Now you're going to have to pay more attention to the market performances when you're retired, because if you're not careful, you could end up just depleting all of your investments sooner than expected, right? And step number 3 is when you truly calculate your financial independence number, once you have your current annual expenses and the safe withdrawal rate figured out. So to calculate your FIRE number, here's what you do. Let's say your total annual expenses are $100,000 a year, and multiply that by 25 and you get $2.5 million. which is your base FIRE number. And you get that figured out from the first 2 steps. Because when you're using a 4% withdrawal rate, multiplying that by 2.5 million, you'll get $100,000 a year, which is the amount that covers your expenses, right? But this is only assuming that you only have your investments. But what if you have a pension or other sources of income? Well, then that changes the game. Like, let's say you have $30,000 a year in annual pension and maybe another $100,000 in total annual expenses. You now subtract $30,000 from $100,000, which leaves $70,000 that needs to be taken out from your investments. Then multiply this amount by 25, and that gives you a $1.75 million in FIRE number with a pension. And instead of 2.5 million that I originally calculated, so now your FIRE investment number is a lot smaller. You see where this is going, right? It's all about having multiple streams of income. And if possible, you may have like a real estate income. You may have a military pension, VA disability compensation, pension from the private sector, or dividend income from your taxable investment portfolio. And you need to list all of your current income sources and figure out which ones will stay with you even after you retire from your 9-to-5 job. And step number 4 is to assess your savings and investments and see where you stand right now. And most of you watching this have some sort of employer-sponsored retirement accounts, like your 401k, 403b, 457, or TSP. And if you're a self-employed individual with a business or some kind of a side hustle, you can still contribute to your 401k or IRA because self-employment income is considered an earned income. And I plan to always have an earned income from my fireside chat business, so I can always contribute to my solo 401k and Roth IRA. And the other question you want to ask yourself is, do you contribute to both traditional and Roth 401k? And how much are you contributing to your 401k every single year? And does it come with an employer match? If so, how much? And does it come with the rule of 55? Because this is a crucial factor when considering your traditional 401k or traditional TSP in your FIRE calculations. So if you leave your job in or after the year you turn 55, you can access your traditional 401k funds without the 10% penalty, the early withdrawal penalty. And for a lot of retirees, this is a huge deal because now you're debating if you can retire at 55 or 59. But if your plan does not come with the rule of 55, you're going to be stuck waiting until you hit 59.5. And that means your 401k is not going to be a viable income source for those early retirement years. And yes, it will significantly impact your overall strategy and force you to rely more heavily on other income sources, income streams, or taxable brokerage accounts, right? And the next one is your Roth IRA. And this is a must-have investment account for your financial independence journey. And most people would say something like, well, I can't access that until I'm 60 years old, right? Wrong. Your Roth IRA can be broken down into 3 separate categories. And first, you should always keep track of your Roth IRA contributions because this is a game changer for early retirees. And I did a survey a while back, and a lot of people think that they cannot touch their Roth IRA contributions anymore. That is not true. They're thinking about the Roth 401k, where your contributions are actually locked in until 59.5, unless you roll that over to a Roth IRA. You can access your contributions in a Roth IRA at any time for any reason without taxes or penalties. And if you contribute $7,000 a year for the next 30 years without adjusting for the annual inflation rate, that's $210,000 that you can have access to at any time, tax-free and penalty-free. So it's very important to keep track of your Roth IRA contributions, and it can play a big game for your early retirement. And the second category you want to keep track of is your Roth IRA conversions. And that includes any backdoor Roth IRA conversions you make every year if you're over the income limits. And your Roth IRA conversions comes with, several rules, and they're important to understand for your retirement planning. So first, there's the 5-year rule, which applies to each individual conversion. So if you convert funds from a traditional 401k or traditional IRA to a Roth IRA, you have to wait 5 years from January 1st of the year of the conversion before you can withdraw those converted funds tax-free. And this is not a 5-year blanket rule for the entire Roth IRA. It's 5 years for each conversion. So let's say you make the conversion in 2025. You have 25, 26, 27, 28, and then 29, right? That's 5 years. Then you can start making the withdrawals on January 1st, 2030. So when you make the conversions in 2026, then you have to wait until 2031. And then when you make conversions into 2027, you have to wait until 2032. That makes sense, right? And there's another rule, which is the age 59 and a half. And even after the 5-year rule is met, you still need to be 59 and a half to withdraw Roth conversions penalty free. I think this rule is dumb. I hope they get rid of it, but right now that rule still remains in place. So if you're younger than 59 and a half, you're going to get slapped with a 10% penalty. And trust me, those penalties will add up eventually. You can always schedule a consultation with me at firesache.com/consultation, or you can check out my private client program at firesache.com/private clients. And the third category that you should be aware of and you want to keep track of is your Roth IRA earnings. And these are the interest, earnings, and capital gains that accrued inside your Roth IRA. So let's say you have $8,000 in your Roth IRA right now. And out of that $8,000 is $7,000 from your contributions. And so the remaining $1,000 is your earnings. You cannot touch those $1,000 in earnings until you turn 59 and a half. So when you plan for your early retirement, you have to exclude the Roth IRA earnings. Otherwise, you're going to have to account for the 10% penalty, federal income tax, and the state income tax. You do not want that. Next, let's go over your taxable brokerage account. And if you don't have one already, you can open one as an individual brokerage account or a joint brokerage account with your spouse. And these accounts are your wild cards, your flexible funds, especially if you're aiming for that early retirement. But unlike tax advantage accounts, there are no age restrictions or withdrawal penalties, and you can access this money whenever you want and for whatever reason. So if you're eyeing for an early retirement before that magic number of 55 or 59 and a half, then your taxable brokerage account is likely going to be your best friend if you have no other income sources like real estate, business, or something else. And think of it as your financial bridge between now until you turn 59 and a half when you have access to your 401k and Roth IRA. Now, this account is not tax advantaged like your 401k or Roth IRA. And if you ever come across capital gains and you want to know what exactly these are, well, they're basically the profits you make when you sell an investment for more than you pay for it. Keep in mind that these gains are taxed, but the rate depends on how long you held the investments for. And you also do not get taxed until you actually sell the investments. So let's say you held your index fund inside your taxable brokerage account for less than a year, then it is considered a short-term capital gain and it's taxed at your ordinary income tax. So that would be up to 37% in federal income tax and not counting your state income tax. Well, you can think of it this way. It's going to be the same rate as your paycheck, okay? And if you held it for more than a year, it's a long-term capital gains tax, and it's taxed at a lower and more favorable rate. And that's why strategic planning is something you need to learn. And people on their FIRE journey are long-term investors. We don't trade index funds like some people trade their stocks. You have to keep those taxes in mind when it comes to investing. And there's another way, another key component of having a taxable brokerage account, and that's the dividend you receive from investing in index funds, ETFs, or maybe even in individual stocks. Dividends are basically payouts from companies to their shareholders, like little bonuses for owning a stock. And many index funds actually pay you dividends every quarter, every 6 months, or every year. And just like capital gains, dividend income is also taxable. But here's the thing, the tax rate depends on whether the dividends are qualified or non-qualified. Qualified dividends are taxed at the long-term capital gains tax rates at 0, 15, or 20%. And non-qualified dividends, on the other hand, are taxed as your ordinary income tax, okay? So knowing this distinction is crucial for your retirement planning because it impacts your tax liability and your overall net income. So for example, let's say you have an ETF that pays you 3% in annual dividend yield. And if you have $1 million in that ETF, you're going to get paid $30,000 a year in dividends every year. And that could be a part of your early retirement strategy if you allocate your index funds correctly as you approach your retirement age. Maybe you don't even need to cash out your investments and just live on your qualified dividends. Again, this is not in any form of personalized financial advice. You need to do your own research to see what's more optimal for your financial situation. And the next thing you need to identify is what's tax-free and taxable income when you retire early. Traditional 401k means that you deferred your taxes. So you're going to have to pay federal and state income taxes. So for me, I'd rather retire somewhere that doesn't come with a state income tax. And Nevada, where I am, happens to be one of them. And anything tax deferred accounts will eventually come with the required minimum distributions or RMD. So I have to keep that in mind by the time I turn 75 years old. And the taxable brokerage account is going to be taxed as long-term capital gains on the profit I make or the dividend payments I receive because I'm a long-term shareholder or long-term investor. And the taxes are a lot lower than the traditional 401k, but I still need to keep those taxes in mind when it comes to making any withdrawals from my after-tax bucket. And Roth IRA is going to be my tax-free income bucket. And it's going to be the holy grail of retirement planning. And when that happens, it translates to more purchasing power, more flexibility, and more peace of mind. But it's not automatic because you still have to play by the rules. We've talked about the 5-year rule, right? And the age 59.5 rule. You have to meet those conditions and understand the differences between contributions, conversions, rollovers, and earnings before you can get the tax-free benefits out of your Roth IRA. And step number 5 is to simply create your own personalized FIRE plan. And I have been following my FIRE checklist for the last 11 years. It's just start creating goals from saving your first $10,000, your first $50,000, and then your first $100,000. Your investments will start accumulating a lot faster when you hit your first $100,000. And I did everything in my power during the first few years of my FIRE journey to hit that first $100,000, even after I paid off my debt. So first, calculate your FIRE number. Know your number. It's your annual expenses multiplied by 25 for the 4% withdrawal rate, and your annual expenses multiplied by 33 for the 3% withdrawal rule, or your annual expenses multiplied by 20 for the 5% rule. And that's your target. Want to retire faster? Cut your expenses, but more importantly, raise your income. You can only cut so many expenses, but your income potential is unlimited. And you're the only one who's stopping yourself from taking the opportunity to be somebody. And if you keep telling yourself that you cannot do it, then you'll never be able to do it. And the next step is to have a rainy day fund. So having that rainy day fund up to your deductibles, at least enough to cover your insurance deductibles. That's going to be a must. It's your financial umbrella. And trust me, you're going to need it at some point in your life. I had a flood in my house. I had gotten into a car accident. I had nails in my tires, multiple tires, right? And they're going to cost me $500, $1,000, $2,000. The maximum I would say is about $2,000, but it really depends on your financial situation. And step number 3 is to contribute to your 401k, but only up to your employer match. So if you have a TSP, you already know that you're going to get 5% if you contribute 5%. So it's free money. If your job matches 401k contributions, take it. It's like a free race. It should be a crime to say no to free money, right? And step number 4 is to pay off your debt, except for your mortgage. And this simply means to kill high interest debt, like credit cards and personal loans, because it's a money drain. A mortgage is okay, but everything else, get rid of it. Trust me, I would not be speaking to you today if I still had $47,000 in credit card debt from 2013, and I would not be where I am today if I still have $44,000 in car loans. And I would not be running this business right now debt-free if I still had a TSP loan from 2014, which is also known as a 401k loan. And I had over $110,000 in total consumer debt because I was completely out of control. And some of you love to hold on to your debt for no logical reason. Stop it. Just get rid of it, right? And step number 5, before you even start investing, is to have at least 6 months of expenses set aside in a high yield savings account. And I want you to label that savings account as an emergency fund. And I know that's boring as heck to save cash, but it's what prevents disaster when something doo-doo happens, right? And look at the federal employees who got laid off recently. And being unemployed sucks. And I'm speaking from experience. You don't want to be in that mindset that your job is safe when it never is, right? And step number 6, this is when you actually have fun. This is when the fun begins. You want to max out your HSA and Roth IRA and think of them as your tax-free buddies. HSA for medical, Roth for tax-free retirement. It's a no-brainer if you qualify, right? And I have a complete tutorial on how to save and invest in an HSA on my channel that might make a difference. There's a complete tutorial about the Roth IRA contributions, the Roth IRA income limits and all that. you can check it out on my channel. And then you want to eventually get to step number 7 to achieve that 25% savings rate into your retirement accounts. If your HSA and Roth IRA give you a 15% savings rate, then put another 10% into your 401k, because 15 plus 10 is 25, right? But if you had already maxed out your 401k, you might need to open up another taxable brokerage account because you're a high income earner. So if you're a high income earner, let's say you make $300,000 a year, and by the 25% savings rate, you already maxed out your HSA, Roth IRA, and 401k, then contribute another 5% into the taxable brokerage account or whatever that may be. Now, if you get to this step number 8, maxing out your 401k, 403b, or TSP, it is one of the fastest ways to achieve a 7-figure net worth status. And when you accomplish the step, you're finally going to see an increase in your investments. Which one do you think matters more? Your savings rate or the stock market return? Would you rather invest $100 a month with a 10% return, or $1,000 a month with a 7% return? Think about it for a moment, right? And if you truly want to retire early, you need to achieve a 50% savings rate. And it's actually really that simple. If you maxed out your retirement accounts and you still have 20% of your income to invest, put them in your taxable brokerage account and let it grow on its own. I have been saving 60% of my income for the last 7 years. And you can just imagine how fast your investments will grow. When other people are staring at the stock market, I stared at my savings rate. And then it's not until the very last step to pay off your mortgage. My wife and I plan to have our mortgage paid off when we're around 55 years old. We're about the same age. At that point in our life, we want to completely eliminate our liabilities, and we don't want to have any debt whatsoever. So you see, it's not just about throwing darts at a financial dartboard, right? It's about precision, knowing exactly where you stand and where you're headed. Look, this is not some abstract concept of whatever. It's your future we're talking about, right? It's about taking control, about building a life where you're not chained to a desk, but living on your own terms. So take these steps, run the numbers, and start building that future, because knowing your number, that's the first step to freedom.